Sorry about that, babe.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Bitscast. This time it's going to be episode 4 of the Bitscast, and we're focusing, as you can clearly see by the title of the video and the overlay, Wild Arms on the Sony Playstation. This is a game that I recently finished my second ever full playthrough. You could check that out on the channel. I'll link everything in the pinned comment and description below. I also did an old review for this game a while ago. Gotta excuse me. Allergies. Oh, I want to get this out of the way too. We're in the middle of a heat wave. I'm absolutely fucking dying right now recording this. I need like my fan blasting on me, but obviously the audio will sound terrible, so I'm not doing that. But anyways, probably gonna be a little bit shorter because of that. It's so hot. I can't even function anymore. I'm ready for summer to be over. You people that love summer and love hot weather and like sweating to death, like you're fucking, there's something wrong. I'm just telling you. I don't like the winter, don't get me wrong, but good God, I can't take this fucking heat anymore. All right, so I did do an old review of this game, probably back in 2000, either 14 or 15, something like that. It was after when I did my first full playthrough. I'm not in love with my old review, but it's not so bad to the point where I wanted to redo it like I did with a few of them, like my Shining Force one. So I will leave that in the pinned comment description below as well. Keep in mind that it was done a while ago. The recording setup that I had wasn't nearly as good. The audio wasn't nearly as good. You know, nothing was as good as it is now. And I also messed up. I mixed up the developer and the publisher. I wrote it in my script wrong, and somebody pointed it out in my review and was very mean. So I just want to get that out of the way. And by the time you see this, you'll probably see an unboxing and overview of the strategy guides as well for Wild Arms. I have the unofficial and official strategy guide for it. Unofficial was from when I was a kid, and the official I got before I did my my last playthrough for YouTube. I'm not going to go through page by page, obviously. That video would probably be like 3 hours long, but give you guys a quick look at it, along with, of course, this. Not as much to look at in these types of things as there are in, you know, a game like Dragon Warrior or Final Fantasy on the Nintendo, but still cool. You know, I'm still trying to document everything, so it is what it is. Alright, so let's get into the game, shall we? Wild Arms, as you probably could tell or know already, is an RPG/JRPG. It was developed by Media.Vision and published by Sony, not the other way around like I said in my original review. In Japan, it was released on December 20th, 1996. North America was April 30th of 1997, and in Europe it was October of 1998. So standard stuff, Japan gets it first, then we do, then Europe. That's pretty much the order of life. All things JRPGs back then. So first, guys, I wanted to kind of go over the story a little bit with you. I actually have like more notes this time than I have in previous Bitscasts, so bear with me if it looks like I'm reading. It's because I am. I wrote stuff, believe it or not. Alright, so Wild Arms takes place in the world of Filgaia, which seems to be a mishmash of medieval Europe, the Wild West, with a touch of outer space and alien. Kind of blends together to be pretty unique. The infamous metal demons, the destroyers of Filgaia, the land which everyone lives in, they've returned. Back during the first invasion, in years past, the humans managed to capture the demon's leader, aka Mother, and they sealed her within a castle in the cold world of Arctica to the north. It's, I think, technically northeast on Filgaia. However, they were unable to fully destroy her. So what they ended up doing was they ripped her heart apart into a few pieces and imprisoned her in a cocoon. And these pieces of her heart were spread across the land into 3 stone statues. As time passed, the majority of all the bad guys disappeared for the most part, but then a group of demon warriors known as the Quarter Knights, who you'll see throughout your playthrough many times, they reclaimed the body of Mother and began to kind of like watch over her in a fortress of some sort. And then, obviously, since her heart was torn apart and put inside the statues, they shifted their attention to finding these guardian statues in order to bring her back to full prominence and have the demons once again lay claim to the land of Filgaia. But that's where Rudy, Cecilia, and Jack, aka the crew, step in. They find themselves together, called upon by the ancient guardians to save the land of Filgaia. They are kind of brought together by interesting circumstances, which you'll see, oops, sorry, banging into my desk, as you play through the game or if you watch my playthrough. And basically from there, the story unfolds. And like I just said, if you want a step-by-step synopsis, I'd recommend watching my playthrough or playing it through yourself. It's really quite the journey. I don't want to go through like step by step through the whole game. a little boring. Plus, it's a long game too. It's not like Final Fantasy on the NES. Like, this is legitimately like a 30 to 40 hour game, depending on how long you take, getting lost, all that type of stuff. But it's filled with tons of great content and side quests. It's much more better experience played, not read to. That's for sure. So, you might be thinking to yourself, you know, like, okay, it's just another JRPG, right? So what really makes Wild Arms unique, especially in the era of, you know, PS1, which was one of the biggest JRPG eras of all time. And I will say that the RPG tropes, for the most part, they do still exist in Wild Arms. It's not like they don't exist. But there are some very unique things about it. First, I want to talk about the tools. Now, these are things that each character finds throughout the game. So there's Rudy, Jack, and Cecilia, obviously. And what these tools do is they help aid you in traversing the dungeons, finding secrets, and so on. In ways, it's kind of like Zelda-ish. Like when you're in the dungeons, you know what I mean? Like laying the bombs in Zelda to blow up the thing, so on and so forth. You literally do get bombs too. Actually, Rudy, one of his tools, his first tool, I think, is a bomb. So it kind of aids in like light puzzle solving. And the puzzles are fairly frequent throughout the game, but I would say that the difficulty is never too hard. And for the most part, they're not too mind-numbingly easy either. So I wouldn't say you're pulling out your hair, but you're also not like, oh, A, B, C to D. Aside from, I guess, you know, the ones at the very beginning could be a little bit easy, I guess. And I will say that there are a few of them that could be quite annoying. There was one in my playthrough. You end up going back to Kirin Abbey, which is the area where Cecilia basically starts. And there's a library. And then later on, you kind of revisit it and go to a new section. And there was a do things in order type of puzzle. I'm telling you right now, I did it in order. I might be wrong because I haven't rewatched the footage and it might have been just salty at the time when it happened, but I did it in order like 4 or 5 times and then randomly just decided to work. But for the most part, I would say the puzzles are very sensible. You know, you can figure them out, even if they are a little tricky. There's one section later on as well in the game, midway, last third, if you will, where you have to like catch like an orb, and the orb moves exactly opposite of you. So like you have to kind of get it caught up on walls and shit, but it's like really, I don't know, it's very tricky. It could be kind of annoying. I wouldn't say it's more of a, in a way it's a puzzle, but I don't know, the way it's kind of laid out to you, I don't know, it's a little odd. You'll see it when you watch the playthrough if you play through yourself. But that's about it for the tools and the puzzles. Now the battle system, this thing's pretty cool actually. So the battle system is in 3D. And as you probably could guess, the rest of the world is in 2D. The fact that it swaps from 2D to 3D is very unique. I don't really remember many games at this point in time that have done that. I don't want to go out on a limb and say that this is the first game that ever did it, but it would definitely be one of the first games that have ever done it. Now, not only does the battle shift to 3D, but you also have the ability to change the camera angles a lot. I typically leave it on the base one, but there's many different cinematic views that you can get. Now, you might kind of look at that as a negative these days because obviously the era of PS1 and N64, the graphics haven't aged very well if they're in 3D. They're not great, but you have to keep in mind back in 1996, 1997, 1998, if you're in Europe, pretty fucking cool, dude. Going from these very highly detailed 2D graphics to all of a sudden, bam, you're in a 3D planescape, you know? It does keep things fresh, especially when sometimes in RPGs battle systems can get a little eh. That was definitely one of the cool things about it. Next, I want to talk about the abilities. Obviously, you know, abilities exist in other RPGs as well, right? But each character has their own, and it's very unique. Rudy has a ability called Arm. It's like special arms technique. He learns and finds them throughout the game. They're basically like super attacks. Shoot like rockets and lasers and shit like that. And then throughout the towns, you can go to an Armsmeister to upgrade your arm, and then somebody reloads your arm for you because they run off bullets. There's bullet clips also that reload them, but it's pretty cool. For the most part, Rudy's arm is going to be the thing that carries you throughout the game, especially during boss fights. Unfortunately for me, Rudy's arm also led to a lot of disc freezes, which I'll get to later. Jax is the fast draw sword techniques. He learns a bunch of these, and what happens is he'll learn them. Some of them are secret, by the way. And then they start off as question marks, and then you have to use them in battle, and then it seems like it's RNG, and then eventually you just learn it, gets a name, gets an animation and gets an MP usage. You'll be using fast draw a lot as well during boss fights, but also during like normal encounters, because a few of them will attack entire groups to make things go a little bit quicker. And you also get, magic sign items, which lower your MP usage for certain techniques and spells for Cecilia or Jack's fast draw, which also comes into play because you can pretty much minimize certain fast draws to like 1, 2, or 3 MP, which makes things very good. Because other than magic carrots, to my knowledge, you can't replenish your MP unless you rest at an inn or something. And then, lastly, Cecilia, she's basically a magic whiz. Her techniques pretty much revolve around, Mystic is the first one, which allows you to basically like pull out the inner power of an item. So, for example, a regular heal berry, if you use Mystic with it, will heal your entire party and it'll heal everybody the same amount. So it's pretty cool. And then she's also a little bit more advanced, obviously, with magic in general and summoning. Her last ability that she can get, I think, is a dual cast, which allows you to do 2 spells. So it's pretty cool. Well, I take that back. So I was talking about her abilities, but it's actually leading into the next section, which is the force bar. Realistically, Cecilia's only ability is the fact that she could do magic, because everybody could summon as long as they have a rune equipped. We'll get into it right now with the force bar. So during battle, as each turn passes, you gain force power up, unless you die or something like that, of course, which allows you to use skills. I talked about the mystic ability for Cecilia. Again, Cecilia doesn't really have anything special like an arm or fast draw. It's basically just magic for her, so that's her shtick. Is more so the force bar combining with the magic. Jack knows accelerator to start off, which allows him to basically outturn an enemy. And Rudy knows lock on, which is pretty good because a lot of the arm techniques, unless you max them out with hit percentage, will miss quite frequently, and lock on allows you to literally lock onto the enemy to not miss. And then eventually you get to second, third, and fourth levels, fourth level being the final level of the force bar. For Rudy, I'm doing a few off the top of my head here. For Rudy, it's Fury Shot, which is basically like a max out version of an arm technique. Typically, it'll do 9,999 damage. I mentioned for Cecilia, she has dual cast as her fourth level force technique. And Jack? I can't remember what Jack's is. Jack's third level is pretty good though. It's basically like a crit attack, and I use that one a lot, but it's pretty cool. Also, the one thing to mention about the force bar, when it fills up, you go to a status green. So like if you have an affliction status upon you, but your force bar builds all the way up and you get into the green status, your status afflictions will disappear, which is pretty cool. You also have, there's an item in the game that if you equip it, it has your force buildup go a lot quicker, which is pretty cool because obviously you give it to Rudy, Fury Shot can be more attainable. And if you're in a battle with a lot of status afflictions, you can just kind of like beast your way through it really quickly. It's pretty helpful. And then, again, touching back on magic, very interesting magic system in the game revolving around crest graphs, which are items that you could find in dungeons and overworld. The overworld has like a floating message in bottle type of things on the ocean, and once in a while there will be crest graphs in there. Obviously, like I said, the dungeons, the towns will have them as well. And basically what you do is you bind and unbind magic to these crest graphs. So obviously you have to find the crest graphs in order to get more spells. And then later on in the game, you can actually find, I want to say it's secret. Do you need it to beat the game? I don't know. But there is a secret magic guild which unlocks like a next level of magic beyond what you typically find. It's just better versions of the spells that you had earlier in the game. But the spells that you can get are limited to the crest graphs. Luckily, if you pick a spell that you don't really like, for example, there's a spell where you're able to kind of like scope out the enemy, you know, figure out its HP and weaknesses and all that type of stuff. I didn't even use it, to be honest with you. And you're like, ah, shit, you know, I'd rather have like an offensive magic spell like Flame or whatever it's called in this game. You could unbind it and then rebind it really quickly. So you're not locked into anything. It's not like, oh, I made this spell and now I'm stuck with it. Which is great because when you find the next level spells, you'll probably find yourself unlocking or unbinding, a lot of the older spells to make room for those. I find throughout the game, even with minimal side questing, just normal exploration, you'll find plenty of crest graphs to carry you through. I'm sure that if you look throughout the entire thing, you could definitely max out all the magic. I ended up with a bunch of extra crest graphs in my inventory at the end because I had all the spells I needed. So it is a pretty cool system though, especially early on, and then especially when you find that new secret magic, isolated guild it's called, to get the next level spells. It kind of makes things very fresh and unique. And then lastly, again, it's sort of, you know, in other RPGs, but it's also unique to Wild Arms, the rune ability. Basically, it's your summon ability. You equip it. Many of the runes also have great attribute buffs that you could equip to your characters, and it seems like certain runes, it's weird because a certain rune will kind of lend itself to a person. So for example, one of the runes you'll get basically revolves around Cecilia, but when you go to equip it, it might not be the best attribute rune for Cecilia, it might be the best one for Rudy. It's very odd. I found that throughout the game quite a bit, which, you know, it's interesting because it kind of leads to a little, you know, openness to the build variety. But again, they're basically summons and they buff your attributes when they're equipped. It's not super unique to Wild Arms, but it's still something to talk about. So those are pretty much all the things, in my opinion, that kind of make Wild Arms unique compared to other JRPGs of the time. But now, this is going to be fresh for me, by the way. You guys know that I like to... Whoa! You gotta excuse me here. I have my keyboard plugged into the front of my computer because I was playing Ultima on GOG, and I normally have it plugged into the back of my computer, but my wire is really short and I was having trouble moving it, so I moved it to the front, and then I just tripped up on everything. But you guys know that I like to read from the Bitmap Books JRPG book. So we're going to read from that now. And I do know, I'll put up a little thing on the screen for you. I do know that this also covers Wild Arms Ultra Code F, which was a remake / reimagining of the first Wild Arms on the PS2. I'm just going to read it through as is, and we'll go from there. So the little caption over to the right. Part of the early wave of JRPGs for the PlayStation, Wild Arms fared well enough to spawn its own franchise, which is a lot of games. There's Wild Arms 1 through 5, there's Ultra Code F, which I mentioned, and there's also a game on the PSP. So I think that's what, 7 games total? There might have been 1 or 2 that came out in Japan, but those are the we all got those ones here in America. All right. As mentioned, developed by Media.Vision. On the PS1 and PS2 for Ultra Code F, and released in 1996 for the original Wild Arms, of course. In Japan, Sony had 3 main RPG franchises in the early days of the PlayStation: Papo Locroy, Arc the Lad, and Wild Arms. I never heard of that first one. Also, excuse me, I got a burp. Disgusting, I know. Of these, Wild Arms was chosen for the English release. It's a fairly straightforward JRPG developed by Media.Vision with an unconventional Wild West aesthetic. Wild Arms introduces many of the series' set pieces. Among them are the setting of Filgaia, a dying desert planet that gives the series its cattle-punk sheen, the Alu, an elf-like ancient civilization, Arms, a mystical gun technology, and the Baskar tribe, an ecologically minded Native American-esque society / hippie commune. You play as 3 characters: Rudy, a silent blue-haired boy, Jack, a treasure hunter, and Cecilia, a princess of the kingdom of Adelaide. The 3 unite to face a band of demons trying to resurrect their leader and destroy the world. The series is sort of a spiritual successor to Neverland's Lufia games. That's interesting, I never really thought about that. I can get some Lufia-ish vibes now that that's mentioned. That's an interesting little tidbit, huh? As it's noted for its puzzles, which rely on the use of tools like bombs, grappling hooks, and magic rods. While these puzzles aren't too hard, some solutions do require thinking about. Meanwhile, battles have just enough nuances beyond typical mechanics to keep you engaged, which, wow, it seems like everything I mentioned they're mentioning too, huh? Who would have guessed? Each character has a unique skill set with its own approach to progression, like Rudy's arms, which are ancient mystical firearms that could be upgraded by gun specialists in exchange for Jello, which is the currency in the game. Cecilia, meanwhile, uses crest grids. Well, I guess crest grid is where the magic's on, and then the crest graph, yeah, okay. The scarce crest graph items which are used to activate them, gotcha. Characters also equip mediums, magic tablets which invoke guardians. The elemental spirits of Fogai, I guess those are runes, which in turn increase various stats and double as summons. There's also the force bar, which increases when you give or receive damage and can be used to trigger limit break like abilities. Graphically, Wild Arms is adequate but unimpressive. I disagree with that, especially for 1996. I think a lot of the scenes throughout the game, especially the 2D monsters coming on the screen, are really cool looking. I don't know, I disagree with that. The 2D field graphics are colorful and varied, but the 3D battles are rudimentary. Okay, gotcha. Well, I don't know, that's up to for debate as well, because I feel like a lot of the 3D graphics of the era kind of suck no matter what, in my opinion. 3D battles are rudimentary with plain chibi character models and blocky monsters. Character designer Yoshihiko Ito does great work with the look of the protagonist, however, establishing the sand-swept poncho and bandana style standard throughout the series. Michiko Naruke's gorgeous soundtrack, yes, great soundtrack, we'll get into that more later, incorporates whistling, mandolins, trumpets, and acoustic guitar, all crucial to the game's Wild West vibes. In fact, some songs sample spaghetti western scores. The track played over the opening cinematic sequence, Into the Wilderness, borrows the main riff of Riz Ortolani's Day of Anger from the film of the same name. That's interesting, I didn't know that. I'm not a big western guy, so why would I know that? Overall, the game is a fine start to the franchise, and at the time it was a decent holdover until Final Fantasy VII was released. In 2003, a PlayStation 2 remake called Wild Arms Alter Code F was released. It adopted gameplay mechanics from the sequels, overhauls the graphics, and extends the narrative, adding more detail and personality. However, the visuals are bland and plastic, and the English translation is worse, so you're better off playing the original. That's interesting. We will get to Wild Arms Alter Code F at some point. Obviously, it's not going to be for a while, because I just freaking played Wild Arms, so what's the point of playing the same game essentially over and over again? But most of the stuff that Bitmap's book discussed there, we kind of went over ourselves, so interesting to note. Seems like I'm not the only one with the similar the view set on the game, right? Alright guys, now we're going to move on into the general reception. I'm just plucking it from Wikipedia, because it does a pretty good job of going over most stuff here. So there we are. Alright, so we have general scores. I'm going to have to look over here, so don't mind me. Game Rankings gave it an aggregator score of 79%, which is fair. I wouldn't say this game should ever be in the 70s for any kind of review, in my opinion. Yeah, something we'll get into a little bit more, but in my opinion, this game should be in the 80s or 90s. 90s might be a little bit too high, but as you can see here, EGM, actually I could see it over here, perfect. EGM gave it a 35 out of 40, Famitsu a 31 out of 40, that's a little low. Game Informer gave it an 8.75 out of 10. Game Fan, that's a weird ranking, 277 out of 300. GameSpot an 8.6 out of 10. IGN an 8 out of 10. Next Generation a 4 out of 5 stars. And RPG Fan a 94%. Now don't get me wrong guys, I like RPG Fan. I use it quite a bit. I like reading them. But in my opinion, they're basically like the Nintendo Life for RPGs, where they kind of just suck things off. I feel like they, obviously they love RPGs, right? So they're a little biased. I don't think in any way, shape, or form is Wild Arms a 94%. That's like very close to being perfect, and this game is not perfect by any means. It's a great game, don't get me wrong. 94%, I don't know about that. I don't think I really agree with that. Now we're going to get into some interesting stuff here. So awards. EGM gave it the Role-Playing Game of the Year runner-up. Reader's Choice as well, same thing. GamePro gave it the 3rd place Best Role-Playing Game. Game Fan gave it the Game of the Month, that's good. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it the Silver Award, and GamePro gave it the Editor's Choice. So I guess I'll leave it right there. So you're probably wondering, why is it the runner-up? Well, lots of very good RPGs came out that year. 3rd place, I guess you can kind of make an argument as well. Here are some RPGs that came out in that year, to my knowledge. Vandal Hearts, Shining the Holy Ark on the Saturn, Grandia, Tactics Ogre, all pretty meaty games in the JRPG genre, right? But later on in the year, Final Fantasy VII came out, so obviously you could probably assume Final Fantasy VII won 1st place in most of those. Now the one where it won 3rd place, I'd be intrigued to see what beat it. If I had to guess based off of the list, I highly doubt I'd be shining the Holy Ark, just because I feel like, not that it's not a good game or anything like that, it's just I feel like, you know, Saturn didn't get a lot of love back then, especially the Shining series. It was probably Grandia, if I had to guess, but anyway, in my opinion, you know, Wild Arms is a solid number 2 that year, and I think that's part of the reason why the game might get lost in the shuffle in the grand scheme of things. Coming out the same year as Final Fantasy VII, you're destined to not necessarily fail, but not succeed as well as you probably should. Like, if Final Fantasy VII didn't come out that year, this is probably the clear-cut number 1 RPG. And honestly, it probably gets talked about a lot more than it does. But obviously, you know, Final Fantasy VII, guys, come on. One of the best games of all time. So is this, but... Alright, so now that we've discussed all that kind of shit, let's kind of get into my thoughts. So like I said, I didn't want to re-review it, but I'm gonna review it on here, in a sense, in more of a bulleted format. I have some notes here, okay? So we're gonna talk about stuff that I like, that's kind of neutral, and that I don't like. So in my opinion, Wild Arms is a top 25 RPG of all time. It's unsung, especially in the library of PS1 RPGs, but I will admit it does have heavy nostalgia value for me. I don't know if you guys could see it. Yeah, you can. There's a huge crack on the case. This is my childhood copy. I never got a new copy of this. This is the one that I got probably at Electronics Boutique at the time before they were GameStop, and I kept my entire life. You know, I didn't play through it in its entirety as a kid, but it has a lot of nostalgic value for me. But all that aside, I mean, you guys saw the reviews and the general reception. It's a really good game, and if it wasn't for Final Fantasy VII, I feel like it would have been top dog that year, and probably talked about a lot more in the grand scheme of things. So I want to get into the things that I really did enjoy about Wild Arms. As far as the 2D stuff goes, wonderful pixel work. Many atmospheric areas, the golems, the photosphere, the quarter night segments in the game, very memorable looking. The bosses appearing like the beginning at the Berry Cave, so on and so forth. It's a true joy to look at. And going along with that, the intro to the game, wonderful. Whether it's the anime cutscene at the beginning or the in-game cutscene that follows it. Two of the most memorable things. The in-game cutscene's more of like, you know, it's a story thing and it's really cool. The anime cutscene, in my opinion, the actual intro to Wild Arms, which got copyright flagged, by the way, on my channel, which sucks. So if I do get monetization at some point, the first part of my Wild Arms playthrough is not going to make any money. It's in my opinion the best intro to a game ever. Honestly, a lot of people will say for the PS1 era that Chrono Cross's intro is really good, which it is. Time Scar is amazing. The mishmash of the cutscenes is really cool as well. But the Wild Arms cutscene, man, it hits different. Between the music and the anime, it's all perfect. Love it, love it, love it. I touched on it earlier. The tools and dungeon exploration is quite fun. It's not too advanced to the point where you're going to pull your hair out, but at the same time, it's not mind-numbingly easy. It pushes you to your limits from time to time, but it doesn't go over the edge, and in my opinion, that's perfect puzzling. And even though the 3D graphics are a little meh, I love the 2D 3D mix. It helps keeps things fresh, especially like I had mentioned in battles and JRPGs. Sometimes they can get a little tiresome, and swapping from 2D to 3D is pretty good. And the load time's not that bad either. So now, again, touching back to something, Michiko Naruke's soundtrack is top notch. It is one of the best soundtracks of all time, for sure, on the PS1. Many bangers throughout the game. Kisham Flame is my favorite track, which is a very short track that basically gets looped, but it's so atmospheric. It's the one that you hear in the Alu Pyramids. The soundtrack for the Quarter Nights, very memorable and atmospheric. It's the one that goes bong, 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 bong. You know if you know. Obviously the intro cutscene, probably the reason why I got copyright infringed or whatever on my channel, is because it's so good, so somebody wanted to claim ownership to that. The battle music is very intoxicating. The battle music needs to be good in a JRPG, because you're in them so much that if it's not good... And the boss music is very triumphant and atmospheric. Like, you know that there's a lot of shit at stake when you go into it. And there's other ones that I'm not even mentioning right now, like the town music. Just, it's good across the board. There's very few, if any at all, songs in the game that you're like, meh. And I will say that throughout the game, the story is very engaging and there are some pull on the heartstring moments. So all in all, like, those are all very good positives, right? So it's a good game. I'm not lying. Now I'm going to get into a couple things that are for me. The pacing. In my opinion, the pacing is okay. It's a little too by the book for me. And what I mean by that is, especially early, mid-game, it's town, dungeon, town, dungeon, town, dungeon. Like, there's really no variation. You don't start going off on hardcore side quests until later in the game, really. A lot of times, certain things can drag too throughout the game. And there's also lots of side quests, which, you know, obviously opens things up, but at the same time, for a completionist, that could actually be pretty draining. There's like a lot of side quests. I had like 3 or 4 videos alone of just side quests towards the end of the game. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people can get burnt out by that type of stuff if they're a completionist. I know I was getting burnt out too a little bit, especially because of disk freezes. Anyway, it's definitely better than it is bad, referring to the pacing, but it still could be improved a little bit. I don't know, I wasn't blown away by it. It wasn't terrible either, and that's kind of why I gave it a middle grade. Now, random encounters. This was a sticking point for me on my review. I've softened a little bit on it. It's no longer a negative, it's a middle thing for me. They can be a bit much. They could also get annoying when status afflictions come into play, which is kind of a JRPG thing in general, but you can't really run as much either unless you're kind of over leveled. At least in my experience, I could be completely wrong here, but I feel like every time I tried to run when I really needed to, it would never work. Unless it was later in the game and I was really over leveled from doing side quests, then I was finally able to run. Of course, the random encounters can be nullified by the invisible spell. You don't get that until a little bit later in the game though, which does kind of suck. And you don't get a lot of magic replenishment unless you're going to an inn or using magic carrots, which aren't that prominent unless you're farming for them. Because between Jack's fast draw technique and Cecilia's magic, there's not an endless supply of MP regeneration, which can kind of get annoying. A little bit later in the game, I had to penny pinch, so to speak, with my magic carrots, but I also wanted to keep casting invisible because I didn't need encounters anymore. My level was high enough. Early on, when I played through it the first time, I had this as a negative. I don't think it's as bad as I said it was, but it can be a bit much at times, especially if you don't use the invisible spell. Now we're going to get into my negatives. Now this is the stuff that holds it back from being a 94% like RPG fan had. Disk freezes. Now apparently this is rampant, more so with the PS2, which unfortunately I did my playthrough on the PS2 because I don't really trust my PS1, and I didn't want to hook up my PS3 because in order to play the PS3 you need that little bypass thingy, and I just didn't feel like hooking it up. But apparently this happens even on emulator, and a lot of times it happens in boss fights and with Rudy's arms, and it's really, really annoying, especially for me as a PS2 user. During this playthrough, I had to constantly redo sections. Sometimes they were 10 minutes, sometimes they were 20, sometimes they were 30 minutes. And quite possibly the biggest side quest, secret boss that apparently makes his appearance throughout the series, which obviously I can confirm, but I haven't experienced yet myself. Ragula, his dungeon, or whatever its dungeon, doesn't have a save spot. In order to get there, you have to do weird shenanigans with the Rudy's power glove and Elu warp dimension things. So I got all the way to the end of his dungeon, and I would wager based off of the numbers that he was maybe 1/4 health or less left, and I was about to win because I had a million goat dolls. Game froze. I chose not to go back and do it because I just didn't feel like replaying 30 plus minutes over again. I was getting sick of disk freezes at that point. Yeah. I don't know, man. They were really annoying. And like I said, apparently it's not just on the PS2. I remember it happening on the PS1 as well back in the day. I think it's happened on people's PS3 versions as well. And I've seen people complain about it on emulator. So one of the big drawbacks is that for sure. And no, it's not my disc. My disc is like basically spotless. This is probably my biggest like actual gripe with the game. There's not much variety in the builds. You typically max out your crest graphs pretty quickly. There's not many options for differing weapons and armor. For the most part, as you go along, you just keep finding better stuff. This isn't like one of those RPGs where it's like you have to make a choice. Like, Do I want this sword with really good physical power? Or do I want this one that has an elemental advantage? Or do I want this one that has the ability to crit more? It's very rarely like that. Only towards the end of the game do you actually get some variation with your armor and your weapons and stuff. Throughout the most of the game, you're just upgrading your stuff at a town, and that's it. Like, you're not finding special weapons and special stuff until way later, and it does kind of bother me. One of the things that you can like swap in and out is the stuff that you hold in your left hand, but I find as the game goes on that you're better off just having goat dolls there, which prevents you from getting actually killed. It like kind of revives you when you get killed. Otherwise, there are things where you could buff your HP, your MP, your attack. You have a better chance of getting more gel at the end of a battle, so on and so forth. Like, those things do give a little bit of variety, but it's really not as much as there should be. I kind of wish that there were more weapons and armors with special abilities to make you think a little bit more, as opposed to like, oh, this one's better, I'm just gonna wear it. You know what I mean? I don't know, just kind of, it makes things a little bit more fresh. And I feel like Wild Arms fell flat there. Kind of going along with that, the characters are who they are. There's really no variety or mixing. Rudy, he's gonna be your arms guy. Jack, he's gonna be your fast draw guy. Cecilia, she's your magic girl. There's really nothing differentiating them besides that. Probably, I guess, the most unique character in the game would be Jack, because he's kind of fast, he's kind of strong, and he has the fast draw. But aside from the tools, like if we're just talking about like actual character abilities in battle, they are what they are. Rudy's gonna be your tank, Jack is your faster mid-tank, and then Cecilia is just gonna be a magic user. Like, she's weak as shit throughout the game. Yeah, you get the ability to find like mystic apples and power apples and stuff that you could use, but it's very minimal stat increases, and I feel like overall it doesn't really do too much. Yeah, I don't know. Those are my gripes with it, really. And for those reasons, it's not a 90+% game in my opinion. I want to revise my score though that I gave it back in the day. I gave it an 8 out of 10. And after playing through it again and further reflection, I do give Wild Arms an 8.5 out of 10. I still don't think it's a 9 out of 10 or higher. I don't. Great game, one of my favorite games of all time, one of my favorite JRPGs, but it is flawed a little bit, and I feel like the flaws that I pointed out do hold it back from being a true epic. You know, a game like Final Fantasy VII, you have much, much more variety. You know, there's, compared to Wild Arms, it's like Wild Arms is vanilla and you know, as far as like build variety and stuff goes in Final Fantasy VII, you know, with the materia system and just all the different weapons and stuff you could find, just that in general kind of changes things. You know, the crest graph system, while cool, only Cecilia could use it. And I don't know, it's just kind of rudimentary. Rudimentary. But all that being said, it's still a great game. It's worthy of an 8.5, and it's worthy of a playthrough. So that's about it, guys. It's hot as shit here. I'm sweating to death. I just wanted to kind of do a Bitscast here for Wild Arms because it deserves it. If you wanted to check out my playthrough, again, pin comment description below, as well as my old review in the unboxing. Hope you guys have been enjoying and enjoyed all the Wild Arms content. We will be circling back to the series at some point with Wild Arms 2, of course. Don't know when that'll be. I'm not going to make any promises there. And yeah, stay tuned for some more RPG stuff for sure. Don't know what's going to be next for me. Well, Ultima, I guess, technically. Still in the middle of playing that. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed, please make sure to like the video, comment. I do my best to reply to all comments, all videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps out the channel. I'll see you guys in the next Bitscast. Take it easy.